Hello, everyone. Welcome to the virtual reception for the 2021 Octagonal All Media Show. Thanks so much for being here and helping us celebrate the work of these amazing artists. This evening marks the opening of 2021 Octagonal and 2021 Business of Art Conference. My name is Rhonda Scott, and I'm with the Octagon Center for the Arts in Ames, Iowa. And I'm standing in for Kristen Gredeman, our gallery director tonight. Those are big shoes to fill, so hope everything goes okay. The Octagon is a nonprofit community arts center that was started by 4 visionary women in 1966. Today's Octagon, when there's not a pandemic, features a beautiful gallery, a retail shop that has that represents 175 local and regional artists, classes and camps of all types, and events such as the Octagon Art Festival. We're dedicated to supporting artists here at the Octagon, and that commitment to artists had led us to the Ames Community Arts Council, and that's how the Business of Art Conference was born. This is Jen Brockpaller, and she is the director of the Ames Community Arts Council, and she's going to give us a little snippet of information about that.
Yeah, I'm just going to keep it super short. As many of you may know, the Ames Community Arts Council is a member-driven organization that works to support artists and arts organizations in our region. In addition to building community, we believe really strongly in giving artists the tools they need to help them to succeed. And to that end, we're super excited, as Rhonda mentioned, to have been able to partner with the Octagon Center for the Arts to present the Business of Art Conference. By pooling our resources, we're able to offer a day-long conference happening tomorrow via Zoom that appeals to the members of both the Octagon and the Arts Council. As a part of that partnership, tonight's juror, Jenie Gao, will be our keynote speaker for the conference tomorrow. And we're super excited that she was able to be a part of both of these events. Thank you so much, Jenie, for sharing so much of your time and talent with us these next couple of days.
Thanks, Jen. Let's turn our attention back to Octagonal. Octagonal was originally titled the Clay and Paper Show, and it started back in 1968. So it's changed a little bit over the years, but it has featured hundreds of artists from dozens of states all across the country. And each year we've had a regionally recognized juror to select the work. Jenie Gao is that juror for Octagonal 2021. Jenie Gao is a full-time artist, creative director, and entrepreneur based in Madison, Wisconsin. Her work focuses on creating cultural landmarks and records that define who we are. She is a writer and an advocate for equity in the arts. The competition was fierce this year. Jenie chose 41 pieces from a total of 349 submissions by 134 artists. So that means 12% of the overall submissions were chosen for this show. The artwork is selected through a blind process, so the juror does not have the name or location of the artist. And the awards are chosen just before the show opens. So that happened just earlier today. It was really exciting. And that is also a blind process where the juror has no idea the name or the location of the artist. The awards are funded partly through an endowment by the Brown family. So we'd like to thank the Brown family for that. And also we'd like to thank Octagonal sponsor, Hala Architecture. I'm going to turn the stage over to Jenie now, and we're going to do a little change so that we can share screen and see some views of the work.
Yeah, all right. Well, hey, thanks so much for that wonderful introduction, Rhonda. So, hi, everyone. My name is Jenie Gao. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm an artist and entrepreneur based in Madison, Wisconsin. And I've been running my business now full-time for 6.5 years. I've had the wonderful luck of being a business owner for the last year during a pandemic. And my specialties include printmaking, murals, public art, social practice, and storytelling. And I also consult for cultural organizations and best practices centered on equity. I'm passionate about labor rights and fair representation. And my work has positioned me at the ground level to work a lot with community and to just really understand the role of the arts in our communities, and also a lot of the problems that can emerge, like arts-led gentrification and displacement. I've been privy to a lot of meetings about creative placemaking and the economic impact of the arts. And one of the questions that I feel that we've yet to really see the arts align with is with labor and workforce development, and this question of what is the value of labor in balance with these initiatives that we have for economic development. We know the arts have an economic impact. All of us know this, right? Like when we hear it over and over again, and all this data getting collected for it, and we know that's why cities want galleries and museums and performing arts centers and murals. We know that it's a big draw, and we know that it plays an important role. And so the question then is, do we want the artists and not just the art that they make? And if we want the artists, then how does all of this change that happens in our communities benefit those whose labor makes revitalization possible? And so on my end, what that looks like is building equity into every aspect of the artwork that I do. I build it into my projects to be able to compensate artists fairly for their time. And I've mentored 22 paid interns and apprentices in the last 3 years through my studio. I currently rent a 1,700 square foot studio in Madison, and the rent I pay directly subsidizes affordable housing in my community. And so these are ways in which I align the artwork that I'm creating with the values that I want them to produce in the community. I like working with mediums like printmaking and public art, and that when these mediums are used well, they can democratize space and information. And so all of that I see as being crucial to the creative process. It's not just the physical art making, but also the process behind it, the operations of the studio and the business as well. And so with that, I'm ready to get into our show. Yeah. Well, yes.
Jenie, there we go.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I wasn't sure how we wanted to.
Yeah.
What sort of handoff we wanted as far as like flooring into the introduction. So, all right. Let's just jump right into it. So, well, we're next going to go through our my selections from the 41 pieces that are in the show for the prizes. And so the this first piece is the winner of the Priscilla Sage Fiber Award, and this is Iridescent Turkey Sticker on the outside by Lily Martina Lee. And as far as why I selected this piece, first, just from a technical perspective, I was just really stunned by the mastery of material required to make this work. And so just aesthetically and physically, this work was interesting to me right away. And then to add to the technical breadth of it, there's the conceptual depth that keeps me hooked. And I really liked what Lily had to say about how she uses and elevates materials that tend to be looked down upon, that these aren't natural fibers, these are rayon and polyester and industrial parts, automotive parts. And, I'll admit for myself that in the last few years, I've been steadily upgrading my belongings to natural fibers. And my fiance and I go thrifting, and we try to find and save well-made items from the landfill. But I appreciated this particular insight and perspective on labor and the history of America, and how we choose to represent that through material. And that this work that Lily submitted to the show offered a complicated representation of that history of America. And I thought that it made a lot of sense to highlight and recognize this piece in 2021, especially during a pandemic and all these questions that we face in particularly industrial or post-industrial areas. So congratulations to Lily on your award. All right, so the second award, the Janet Harris Squires Clay Award, sponsored by Halo Architecture and Structure and Planning. So this award goes to Ingrid Lilligren, and the piece is called Ignorant. There were, you can't really plan for a juried show what's going to get submitted and how all these pieces come together. I really enjoyed how many tactile artworks ended up being in the show, and just visual pieces that engaged other senses as well. And this one in particular, I really enjoyed. There are so many layers about this that I like. I like that it engages not only our visual senses, but also our sense of touch. I like that it features Braille, which means that it's intended to be read, whereas most of the time in visual art, we are striving for nonverbal communication, and this is a very verbal form of communication in a visual nonverbal form. And so I also like that because it's a tactile piece and because it has Braille on its surface, it's actually not very functional as a vase. It has holes that limit its usefulness as a physical container. But what it loses as a physical container, it gains as a message carrier. And I thought that was a really powerful aspect of the piece. So congratulations to Ingrid on your award. All right, so this next award is for the metal piece. So this is the Martha Benson Metal Media Award. And this piece is entitled Quilted Grid by Jeremy Diamond. Again, another really wonderfully tactile piece. I like this piece and the other piece that Jeremy submitted of this tickling bracelet. They both stood out to me. And again, these are works that engage senses other than the visual. And I love that this one in particular, Jeremy described it as when you touch it, it's supposed to mimic the feeling of touching a fingertip. And this artwork is pretty unassuming, it's only 2 by 2 inches in size, and it's got this pale stitched surface. It's this little square, but it's so thoughtfully crafted when you look at it up close. And I love that this is something you really have to pay attention to and engage with to actually understand. It's not a big statement piece. It's something that you as the viewer have to choose to engage with it. And it is exactly enough. It doesn't need other frills. It's pared down to its exact purpose, which is to feel like a fingertip. And I'm honestly sad that I don't get to interact with this artwork in person because of the pandemic. So, okay. All right, so the next award is the Veronica Rudenberg Mixed Media Award. This piece is titled Transition of Venus, and it's actually by Jamie Malone, who's the curator in residence right now at Octagon, which I didn't know since this is a blind process, and I was really excited to see this come through. When I was jurying the show for just the selection of the pieces in the exhibit, I liked this artwork right away, and it was because I could tell that the person who created it was someone who knew how to tell a story with a picture. The composition is lovely. The portraiture is lovely. The elevation of an individual through portraiture is really well done. It's a beautiful piece. And actually, this was one of several that I found myself thinking about quite a lot when I was making final selections for the prize winners. Because I felt that there were several pieces that could have entered under several different categories, and this just made my position super tough as a juror. Thinking oh, this could be a paperwork, this could have been a painting, but it also makes sense that it got submitted under mixed media, and the mixed media category was so broad, and it was one of the biggest categories that people submitted under, and so I found myself struggling and comparing very strong, very different mixed media pieces, and I'm trying to figure out like, how do you even compare these things? Like some of them have fiber, some of them are paper, some of them are metal, and a mix of all of these things. And ultimately I ended up asking myself, like, had this particular artwork, had Transition to Venus been submitted under another category, like say it had been under paper or painting, would it have been one of the finalists? And I said yes, like it would have been, regardless of which category it had been submitted under. And so it's this piece that is about transitioning and about gender fluidity. And so why should it not also be category fluid? And so yeah, just so that those were all just like the fun questions that came up for me while I was during this work. And finally, there were many strong portraits that got submitted to Octagonal. And in thinking about which ones to include, and then ultimately for the prizes as well, particularly in this era, we need trans people to be visible, and for them to be visible in their totality, including their faces. We don't have enough of that representation in portraiture, and so when a strong example of diverse portraiture enters our spaces, it deserves recognition. And so I just in terms of like where we are culturally at and what art is for culture, I wanted to make sure I elevated that. So, okay, let's go on to the next one. Okay, so for the Paper Media Award, this is funded by the Brown Family Endowment Fund. So this particular piece is called Frozen Floral Waste, #1, and it's by Jody Boyer. And I thought that this piece captured the sensibility of the pandemic really well. It's part of a series of photographs of these like kind of melting ice cubes that contain little bits of fauna and on domestic objects like the bottom of a glass in this case. And what I liked about these pieces was that like you can tell what it's a photograph of, and yet at the same time you need to sit with it for a while to process and understand why these things are in a photograph together. And in this particular illustration of time being frozen, I thought that was a really lovely body of work to come out of the pandemic. It felt very timely. It felt very contemplative, and very elevated as well. I mean, it's on this bright red background with these bright red like cherry-like pieces in the ice, and framed like these natural elements framed in what's a very domestic setting, which is where all of us have been spending a lot of time. I got the feeling that you could look at any one of the photographs and know that it was a part of a series, and a greater contemplation. And that to me was a signal of a strong body of work. So, all right, so this is the Wood Media Award funded by the Brown Family Endowment Fund. And this piece is called Tortuous by Tom Wally. And it's made of 1,560 different pieces to make a Taurus knot. And that's just amazing. I mean, like woodworking in general, like there's just like people just invest so many years into perfecting a craft, but I just thought that this was really phenomenally well done. And I love that what Tom had to say about this work is that that he made it to see if it were possible, to even make it. And I find that just a really refreshing level of curiosity. There's play, and oddly, there's even spontaneity in something that's so methodical, meticulous, and tediously crafted. And all that to answer the question, like, is it even possible? And so this piece makes me happy. I'm glad it exists in the world. All right, and so the Painting Media Award, funded by the Brown Family Endowment Fund, goes to Self-Portrait as an Invasive Species by Kaylin Jade. And I mentioned earlier that there are a lot of really good portraits in the show, and this is one of them. I found myself thinking a lot uh, about the themes of nature in this show, and some from a human perspective, and some without the human perspective, and just focusing on the natural world itself. We've got really good examples of that throughout the show, and this artwork just hit several notes for me. It included the human in the context of a nature scene, and included in a way that makes you question why this person is here. It's a bit of an uncomfortable scene, and it doesn't necessarily look symbiotic or at ease. And I think that that in naming this a self-portrait as an invasive species, it also raises a lot of questions for us in a pandemic year, and in a year when we saw some really huge climate catastrophes. We had wildfires across most of the western half of the United States. We've had some really drastic weather at a time when people have not had a lot of mobility, at a time when we really can't see much of the world beyond our purview. And at the same time, we are intimately and hyper-locally aware of our surroundings. And so this felt like a timely piece to highlight. All right, so the Emerging Artist Award goes to Baptism by Paige Holzbauer. And so this piece, this is just a photograph of it, but the photograph itself is printed on linen and surrounded by sand and installed on the floor of the gallery. And you know, again, you can't plan for this in a juried show, but it seemed fitting that the breadth of this show contains reflections on nature and science, and through this piece, faith. And I think the same imagery in this artwork would not have worked nearly as well in a more traditional medium like painting. And so let's say that this had been a photograph put up on the wall, or even a painting put up on the wall. I don't think it would have had the same effect, even though it's still the same symbolism of the body and water, and of this baptism, and of this religious experience. But there's something about taking the portrait off of the wall and installing it on the floor, and surrounding it with sand, where you're not only recreating the scene of baptism, you are subverting the expectation that we would engage with this experience via a portrait, a painting, a screen, all of these things, right? Like even our computer screens, like all of these things are designed to be in front of us to bear witness to. And right now you're forcing us to look down on what's supposed to be a religious experience. And I think that's a compelling portrayal. And so for the Emerging Artist Award, I really wanted to recognize this use of media and space for a concept. Okay, and so now we've arrived at Best of Show. So this is the Winifred Brown Best of Show Award, funded by the Brown Family Endowment Fund. And this artwork is called Stretched Thin by Katie Wahlberg. Once again, we couldn't have planned or predicted this, but I'm just really genuinely impressed with the overarching story that all of these artworks tell together. I've mentioned technique a lot in this show because I always love when an artist has taken their time to know and exercise their craft really well. And I think that it's important to elevate that in the arts, because historically the way we talk about concept and craft is different. We tend to talk about them like they're compartmentalized, and they're not. They actually work in tandem. And you even think about in terms of gender disparities in the arts and how historically men's, like in the art world, we talk about men's ideas and we talk about women's craft. And so for me, elevating both is really important, and knowing why a medium is important and why we're choosing to honor a particular material that we're using to bring an idea to life. And so I like that this piece uses this kind of illustration, pop-up style sculpture format. It's so immense and it's also fragile. It feels fragile. It feels like it's ready to burst. And Katie submitted other works as well, and so I got a sense of her work from the pieces that she sent in, and they really struck a chord with me about how our cities have evolved and who they work for and who they do not work for. And there is a sense of anxiety and urgency about these artworks that very much captures the sense of the city and the future of cities. And frankly, not just of big cities, but of smaller cities and towns that are on the cusp of development. These are pertinent questions today. There's a prediction that 2/3 of the world will live in cities by 2050. And so it's going to matter a great deal what we invest in today in terms of housing, in terms of industry, in terms of representation in the cities of the future. And so this, for many reasons, just felt very relevant, and it was just really clear from the pieces that Katie submitted that this is an idea that she's spent a lot of time really practicing and honing her work towards. So I really felt that deserved recognition. So congratulations on Best of Show. Yeah. And so I can share a little bit about just my thought process on the selections for the show and for the prizes. And Rhonda, Jamie, feel free to cut me off at any time. I've just got a little bit, and then I figure I'll just hand it off to you after that. So in the selection of the artwork for the show and the final prizes, I asked 3 questions. The first one was, what do I like? Just on an intuitive gut level, what do I respond to? And then second question I asked was, well, why do I like these things? Why do they resonate with me? And the third question that I asked myself was, beyond the individual artworks, on a collective level, do these works of art together fairly represent the world that we live in? And so I asked that because, like there's always this like tense point, both for the selection of the artwork, right? So the 41 pieces that make it into the show, and then of the prize winners too, of like these shows are so hard, right? And I'm an artist as well, and so I know what it's like to be on the juror side and also on the juried side, and there's limited space, and the reality of white box galleries is that they don't operate in isolation, and so these are hubs of what the greater community and culture recognize as valid. And so I look at these pieces individually and ask about their inherent qualities, and then I ask how do they function as a part of the collective show as well. And so not to curate based on that, but to say that like, hey, like if we're going to create a show that genuinely represents the community that it's going to live and be a part of, does it feel like once these works stand together, that they are telling that collective story? And so at the end of this process, like there's no way to know in advance how it's all going to come together, but now seeing the themes that have emerged across the artworks, across the 41 artworks, and then across the prize winners as well, and what that means in this moment in time, that to me is the validation of a successful juried show. I do think that these pieces together tell a really commanding story about who we are. So Yeah.
Thank you, Jenny. I really appreciate all your work on this show. Your comments are so thoughtful. I know that you've put a lot of time and consideration into them. We'd also like to thank all the artists who submitted work. We know that that's a vulnerable process and it takes a lot to submit work. So we'd like to thank everyone who was part of this process. Let's turn now to our panel. Tonight we have 4 Octagonal artists with us to talk about the concept that artists are essential. It's something that's very near and dear to our hearts here at the Octagon, something that we talk about a lot. And tonight our panelists to help us think about these ideas are Jody Boyer, Tibby Kelcha, Cindy O'Hearn, and Josh Sorrell. And we're going to get to know them a little bit over the next 30 minutes. But I wanted to be sure that you could see their artwork, the one piece that they have in the Octagonal show this year. Of course, we're not doing justice to the depth and breadth of their work. They have done so much amazing work. And I really encourage everyone to see their work in person in the Octagon Community Gallery, if that's possible. If you cannot be here, I really encourage you to look up these artists online and see their work. I will be putting their websites in the description of the video on YouTube when this is over. So I hope that you will visit the websites for all of them, including Jenie Gao. So there's a lot of amazing work by these artists. And I really appreciate that you all have come to talk with us today about this. Artists are essential. So we're going to throw out some questions. Josh, you're kind of first on my screen. Can you start us off with what does it mean to you that artists are essential?
Thank you for the question. What does it mean that artists are essential? Well, when I think of something that's essential, you kind of have to imagine, could you get by without it? And with all the different kinds of artists that are out there, there's painters, sculptors, writers, musicians, videographers, directors, designers in the architecture field, interior design. I mean, it just goes on and on, the different types that are out there. And once you think of all those types of people that are out there creating amazing things to look at, I wonder, what would it be like if they're all gone? What would our lives be like if every single piece of art just disappeared? Think about your home, I think would be a good place to start. What would your house look like if you took away the art on the walls, the decor items, little trinkets that you put on your shelves, the books you read, the music you listen to? All those things are gone. It's almost like, I guess, you're living in a cave almost at that point. I mean, you basically have 4 walls and a roof, and it takes away your identity. I think all these little things we collect and put around us that artists made are part of what makes us who we are. And without that, I think it doesn't sound like a way we want to live. It would be very boring. And yeah, sounds very like an awful existence, I guess, without any of that.
Does anybody want to add to that?
Well, I should point out that even when people were living in caves, they were painting on the walls. So,
Exactly.
you know.
Exactly. Even the cavemen could not live without some sort of art on the wall. So I think that, again, it just helps with the point.
Right. No, I totally agree with that. And, we are still living through a pandemic, but if you reflect on the past year, we are coming out on 1 year since things started to shut down and everything. Think of all the things that have carried you through this pandemic, all the books that you've read, all the shows that you've seen, all the artwork that you have lived with in your home to kind of make your stay at home or, this situation fraught with danger, make it more easy to go through. And for me, that's a very valid answer. And, there's so many other examples like that. I don't need to go apocalyptic because, people consume art a lot of times, were consuming art before the pandemic and they're going to consume art afterwards. But even in times like this, you needed art. So for me, that means that it's essential to be an artist, to create that for people.
Not to mention, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think, art is a way human beings can show that we are a species that doesn't just survive. It's how we interpret the world around us, and it gives our life meaning. And so I think artists are essential because they show us the capabilities of human creativity. And it might just be the trinkets you put on your walls or whatever, but that sort of leads to progress in society. These disparate ideas and influences that artists use and internalize and then put out into the world.
So let's go to another question. How does this idea that artists are essential impact your work or the work of someone you know?
Do you want somebody to start that one?
Oh, yes, that was my job, wasn't it? Start someone off. How about you, Cindy? Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, essentially, art is essential to me because I think it's essential to my well-being. I think a lot of creatives can agree that there's a certain compulsion that makes us create. If we were just working our basic 9 to 5s, it's like even you're just daydreaming all day thinking of the next project you're going to work on. So for me, I think it's just helps with my emotional well-being, and it's this urge and it's a necessity to get something creative out. It's how I kind of understand my place in the world and can interpret that, and it helps to express maybe emotions that I'm not good about speaking about, or it helps in communicating with other people as well.
I see lots of heads nodding. Does anyone want to add to that?
Well, I have lots of roles as an artist and an educator, and one of my roles is to teach in a middle school during the day. So I teach 11, 12, 13, 14-year-olds, and the arts are so critical for them coming into being and finding self. And one thing I try to do in my visual arts classroom is teach them that a creative practice is just like playing a sport. We have to do it to keep our minds and our souls healthy. And when I talk to young people about artistic practice in that way, and I start to see them take ownership of it, I feel such pride in being able to give that gift to them, because I feel like we are coming to understand, there's some recent scientific studies looking at creative practices and brain development and brain health and emotional health. And so being able to give that to my students at that age and start to maybe shift how the world looks at the importance of the visual arts to like holistic health is one of the things that I do. I'm kind of rambling, but so.
No, I agree. I mean, for me, it's also interesting about how my art practice integrates with other things that I do. By training, I'm a software engineer and an electronics engineer, and that's what I do as a day job. And that obviously influences my art a lot of my art is related to technology. But it goes a lot the other way around too. You know, I've had projects at work, I cannot discuss about them, they're not public yet, but I've had projects at work that really I was able to push to come up with new ideas, and they were like very technical ideas, but they were influenced by me being an artist, me having a visual imagination, you know, like finding new ways of analyzing data, for example, you know, structuring the data in a certain way that kind of made sense. It was pretty, I liked how it looked also, but it was also very informative and was able to solve the problem in a, you know, interesting, unexpected way. So, you know, kind of speaks about, maybe it's not essential, maybe you don't need to be a visual artist to come up with good engineering ideas, but it shows how art can interact with other things in a very unexpected way. Because, you know, people don't think of electronics as art, but yes, it can be, it can influence it.
Yes, I one thing that I think of to tag on to what you're saying and what Jody said is sometimes it seems like, and I'm going a little off script here, but sometimes it seems like it's easier for the public to support art or art classes than it is to think about the importance of the artist. And we have talked about that actually quite a bit at the Octagon. I think, Jenie, did you say something like that earlier tonight about valuing art versus valuing the artist? I think that somebody mentioned it.
Yeah.
I think it's you.
Yeah. That's well, for everyone who's going to come to the conference tomorrow and attend my keynotes, I'll get a lot more into that topic then. But that's a dichotomy that I like to point out, that we talk about artists and the art they make very differently. You hear a lot of campaigns about support the arts, and then we get a new performing arts center, and we get all this like funding for like all of these like new like art programs like and nonprofits, and then the thing that we still haven't solved is how do you actually make sure that professional artists can have a prosperous career that actually supports their livelihood. And so like our treatment of people versus property is very different in this society. And artists are like, we are among the few jobs that can't be automated. The computer still cannot replicate the artist's mind. It can replicate so many other things, but it cannot replicate the artist's mind. And so if this is like one of the last domains that separates us from what our machines can replace for us, well, why have we not figured out how to value artist labor and center the artists in this work?
Absolutely. And we can't continue to have art and things like art education if we don't support the people who are doing it. You know, it's like, how does that work? You know, so yeah, thank you for that. This is a good segue to the next question. So oftentimes art is perceived in a certain way as something that's a luxury item or frivolous, even not necessary. What would you like to tell people in response to this perception? Who has not spoken as much? Is Jody, do you want to start us off with that?
Sure. You know, Josh spoke a little bit to this in terms of looking around your personal landscape of your home and how the arts influence you. I think that people have a really narrow conception of what the arts can be, and so they don't see the full impact. And then the second part of the question, what would you like to tell people in response to that perception? Okay, so I will play my middle school teacher role. So I actually do this assignment in middle school. We look at all of the careers that you could have in the arts, because so many of my middle school students love art, but then they have family members tell them that's not really a path you can take for a career. So I have them investigate. I have a website I use that has about 150 careers on it that you never think as being related to the arts, from everything from like naval ship designer to swimming pool designer to taxidermist. You know, all of these are related to making an object or representing the world visually or designing the world. And I think it's important for artists to tell the stories of what we do and to try to make part of our everyday culture, teaching our young people how the arts are embedded around us. Because I think that, like you were saying, Tibby, those narratives are sometimes not made present. And only by making those narratives present and telling our stories and looking around the world and illuminating all of the roles that are played in the world that we navigate, do we make people aware of the value. Because I think it's so easy for people not to realize. My favorite thing is when kids that are really interested in tennis shoes, you know, kicks, a new pair of kicks. I'm like, who designs those? You know, like, did they just show up one day, you know? And, you know, it's amazing to watch a young person's mind go, I could design shoes? Like, I can't just buy them. Like, I could design them, you know? And it's just a fascinating shift in a young person's mind. And I think we need to do that to people who are already grown up, who have these narrow embedded ideas about the arts and what the arts do.
Yeah. Anybody have something to add?
Yeah, I think I just add that there's so many simple things that we do on a day-to-day basis. We're not even realizing we're looking at art. Like when we decide to go to the movie theater, which is kind of difficult right now. And if that was gone, that would just, you know, with Netflix and the streaming services, can we imagine trying to get through this without some sort of I can't imagine a more important time in our lives like this last year where that kind of entertainment has really helped people to get through it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Star Trek inspired the smartphone. You literally wouldn't have a smartphone if it weren't for television, if it weren't for a television show.
Right. Yeah, and do you know the story, you know, about the flip phone? Why it opens downwards and not upwards? Because that's what it was in Star Trek.
It was literally inspired by science fiction.
Right.
Like basically, yes, it was inspired by art on a TV show. Like
Right,
some designer made that little made the little communicator. And now smartphones are multi-billion.
Design the camera that we're using right now.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you know, like I agree with
the cameras. I mean, think of the first.
Oh,
I think, Josh, you might be freezing up a little bit for us. So hopefully you'll come
Go
back.
ahead. Was that it?
oh. No, I kind of wanted to continue on what Jody said. It's clear that I'm not sure whether I'm talking about Josh or not.
Go ahead, Timmy.
All right. Yeah, so I agree with what Jody said, that, you know, and it's not just for kids, for teenagers that, you know, all of a sudden the view opens up and they learn something new. Even for adults, you know, I'm sure that they don't realize a lot of things are art and don't consume them as art. You know, everyone is like, oh yeah, sure, I'm gonna watch the latest Netflix show or Disney Plus or whatever it is, the latest thing. And then you point to them, well, that's art. Some artists, actually put a lot of work in that. Kind of seems a bit lost, that connection somehow, and kind of needs pointing out that,
It does.
yeah, a lot of the things that you are interacting with on a day-to-day basis, there was an artist or some artists that have touched it at some way, contributed some ideas along the way, like the flip phone. But there's lots more than that,
Yeah. All right. So we have mentioned this year a lot, this unprecedented year. Can you guys say something about how your creative practice has evolved over this year in response to the many, many, many things that have happened in our world? Cindy, maybe do you want to take that one?
Sure. I think the works I was creating prior to this year were very personal and kind of just sort of meditations on sort of what it means to be a fiber artist and craft and stuff. And I think this year my work focused a lot more on my response to what was going on in the world. I did a little installation at the OL Guild space, and initially it was just going to be a very fleshy sort of show, but then it ended up turning into like a rib cage, because at that time, that was in April, and that was when people were kind of figuring out how to deal with being at home with themselves this whole time. And I remember meditation was like a big thing at that time. And so I made this sort of rib cage hut that was meant to be sort of a meditative space for people to think about the breath, which this whole past year has been demonized because of the respiratory illness that is going through the world. But it's also, breath can bring so much healing to the body. So I made this ribcage tent. And prior to this year, I feel like my work personally hadn't really been in response to external stimuli at all. It was just my sort of internal thoughts and stuff. And so I think it did have a profound effect on the work I made last year.
And all right, I want to see if you can hear me now. Am I better?
Yes.
You were
Okay.
you were kind of freezing up a little bit, but I think it's better. We'll let you know if it
New
happens.
studio space, and I'm still unsure on how clean their connection is. So I wanted to make sure before I started talking again. So I just wanted to kind of tack on to this question. This last year has been very interesting as far as creating art. My art, especially the piece in this show, I call it viral. And I've always been trying to find new ways to have color and environment sort of interact with the subject matter. And with the piece in this show, I was definitely kind of harnessing that idea of the virus kind of floating around us and using color to symbolize that sort of the virus sweeping through. And it really helped. I mean, this year, I'd say it gave me a chance to really get a good idea of where my work's going to go. So, and I guess some good comes out of this crazy stuff we're going through right now.
My spouse is also an artist, and so I think artists might be one of the few people that felt like we all got an at-home artist residency out of this. I don't know if any of you felt that way, but I teach in a middle school in Mask, but my spouse actually now teaches completely remote, and so has been essentially isolated for a year to today. Remember, Rhonda, last year we were at the conference and this all was hitting, and I apologized that I had come from Omaha because I was so frightened. I was standing there in fear that I had brought the virus, and I was driving home. I stopped at Target. I bought toilet paper. I was like, I better buy toilet paper in Ames because my friends say it's going crazy in Omaha. And then I really just got home and realized once my school district shut down and I was teaching from my home, I was like, well, let's turn this into an artist residency. How can I use this to cocoon? I've used that metaphor in some other panels I've been on, that this whole past year has been such a cocooning, and And I think so many beautiful things are emerging from this process of having to social distance and having to consciously take care of each other in this way. You know, for me, I know my work has shifted a lot, and it feels like a huge period of growth that I did not anticipate at the beginning of the pandemic.
I think one thing that is interesting about what you're talking all about, you know, we all went through this thing together and we experienced different parts of it or had different reactions to it. But something that artists can give us in times like this is a way to explore or experience or give voice to these common experiences that we all have, that we might not have words for, or we might not have thought about some aspect of it. And, you know, when we're talking about artists being essential, it just seems to me like I need to underline that one of the things that you're doing, because you are often informed by or impacted by the world around us in what you create, you are also helping the world process what is happening. So thank you for that, by the way. Does anyone want to add anything more to that question? Let's go. Oh, go ahead. Did you?
So, no, I mean, you know, like I haven't really answered it. For me, it was a very strange reaction in some way, you know, kind of like, probably like a lot of other people, I kind of retreated a bit into myself. And even if my artwork is generally fairly geometric, fairly abstract, I've noticed that a lot of times recently, and like in the piece that I have in the show, it's I'm starting to reflect more of where I come from and, you know, my life and the influences. Like the piece is a circuit board. I designed circuit boards as art, and, you know, I went and cross-stitched on it. But the patterns that I've used for cross-stitching were from some old patterns from Romania, you know, that I found in some old books. And kind of, it was a way for me to reflect on where I come from and, you know, what influences me in what I make. The other reaction was more like reflective of how people use the internet a lot more. I've started to use cloud platforms for AI experiments in my art, but that's a bit esoteric.
Thanks. Our kind of last question tonight is, what could people do, in your view, to perpetuate this idea that artists are essential in our communities and in society? What could people do? How can people help? Oh, I keep forgetting that I'm supposed to tell somebody to start talking. Yeah, sorry about that. Let's see. How about Josh?
Okay. So how to perpetuate this idea that artists are essential in our community? I think, you know, hopefully my connection is still good.
Yeah.
I think we have to just remind people that art is all around us. It's in our homes. It's when we drive down the street. It's the murals on the buildings. It's the car we're driving is art. I mean, there is kind of I would say there is kind of a overlapping idea between what an inventor is and what an artist is. And, you know, all the things we use on a day-to-day basis, from this Zoom camera that I have mounted on my monitor, somebody had to design that. Somebody created a camera 100+ years ago, and that inventor would be considered an artist, in my opinion. I think if you just imagine that, all, not just from an entertainment standpoint, but just utility standpoint, your cars, architects, all these different things, it's just, without it, we're pretty much in the dark as a civilization. So I think if we can just remind people that it's everywhere. Without artists, we take away a lot of things. And it makes life a lot more enjoyable to have it around.
Can somebody?
Sort of add to that too. I think as artists, we can, participate in like advisory boards in our communities. We can contact our legislature and the members and let them know that there's shows going on, that arts are already integrated into our community, and that's what makes our communities strong. And we need to show people at higher levels that this is important to us and these things are happening whether or not they recognize it or not, and sort of make that public funding and government funding still come into the state for the arts as well. I think that's very important as artists.
I think shifting the narrative is, am I talking over Tibby?
Go ahead.
Oh, shifting the narrative is so important in your communities, and also starting with your young people. I think there's a stereotype that is perpetuated that artists are crazy people, that they are weirdos, and it's so deeply embedded, they cut their ears off and they send them to people. So it's so deeply embedded in our popular culture stereotypes of what we do. And we have to shift that in how we parent our children and how we educate our children, because that trickles up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then in politics, we have an artist running for mayor here in Omaha who is raising the discussion about why we don't have more civic arts support in Omaha. And, I wish that an artist would run for mayor in every town in America. Like, why not? It would be a great way to shift the civic dialogue.
Anybody else want to add?
Well, I kind of agree with all the points raised about, having people, kind of educated. Of course, it can be too preachy and all that, but, pointing little things to them, pointing the murals that, make your street a bit nicer and all that. And, people start to see that it's essential. Sure, going up to the legislatures is fine, but then hopefully the legislatures have to come and convince people that, hey, arts are good, or maybe they're going to hear from the people in their constituency that, we should support arts more. I kind of love it that here in Ames, like the city council, of course, the budget has been hit by the pandemic, but they haven't talked that much about, okay, yeah, we're going to balance the budget or whatever on the back of the arts. They're still supporting that. So, that's a small sign, and that's great. Pointing things out to people and, having them educated. Yeah, that would be great to do.
We have a few minutes left, and I was wondering if each of you would be willing to give us a little information about who you are and what you do as an artist, to just share with our audience more about you as a person, since I wasn't really able to go into your bios. Cindy, could you just start, and we'll just go around the circle and
Sure.
say a little bit about you and what you do?
Yeah, I am a figurative fiber artist. My medium is felt work. I came to it, I have a background in garment design and accessory design. So kind of ties into this conversation. I was making all of this work for my little business called The Compost Pile, which is garments, jewelry, leather work. And then I just got to a point where I was just so sick of making things for consumption and to sell things. And so I eventually took some time off and had taught myself the craft of felt making and started to make these sort of grotesque figurative pieces that sort of explore my ideas of self and femininity.
And you have some nice time-lapse videos of, can you tell people where they can find that?
Yeah, my Instagram is cynthia.ohern. And I put up time-lapse videos of myself creating the felt work. A lot of people don't know what felt is, so I guess it's when you take wool roving, which is a essentially sheep's hair, and you lay it out on the surface, add friction, water, and soap, and then mat it into a solid piece of cloth. So my felt pieces they're essentially 2D works, but you can make them 3D by then draping them on the form because they are a textile. So they can be very fluid, but yeah. And then my website is cynthiaohern.com.
Great, thank you. Josh, could you tell us a little bit about you?
Sure. So I am an oil painter. I do a little charcoal and pencil graphite work. Most of my work is definitely figurative in nature. I do a little bit of still life, but lately in the last few years, it's been pretty much figurative work. And it focuses on a lot of just how we evolve as people. You know, it's a lot about identity and just the little things to the big things that make us who we are. I'm always fascinated by, you know, how I got here, how I got to this point, and all the things that had to happen for all of us here in this Zoom call right now to be where we are. This those, you know, little external forces that push us one way or the other, and we react to them. And each layer of paint that I put on my oil paintings is kind of symbolic of that one thing that we've added, kind of like a, you know, layers of onions. We keep adding new little pieces to our identity all the time. I don't know why, it's just been a constant interest to me, just because I've, for many years, didn't really know what I wanted to do. My parents always wanted me to be in business school or be a CPA or something safe like that. And that's what I started to do. I was working at architecture firms for quite a while and just never was really happy. So as of 6 years ago, I've been completely self-employed and doing art as my full-time vocation. And I think a lot of that just kind of got me to that point where I'm like, how did I get here? And I think a lot of people, when they look back at all those little things that turn them into who they are, that's just something that I continue to explore. And probably I don't see any of that changing for quite a while.
And you have a new studio.
And I have a new studio. Yes, this is all, it's very echoing here, but luckily I found a really great app that takes away all the echo in this environment right now. I need a few more things in here. It's kind of empty, minus my artwork that I got at the last second. It was the first Friday today at Mainframe Studios. So there's a few people walking around. I got a little bit of that done before this started. And yeah, I got my first hand at hanging my own show basically on my walls, which was fun.
Well, that's great. It's good to see you in your new place. Can you tell everybody where they can find you?
Oh yeah. So see my name there in the bottom of my corner of my screen. It says Josh Sorrell. Just add a .com to that, and that'll get you to my Instagram, my Facebook, and to my webpage.
Great. Thank you. Tibby, how about you?
All right. Okay. So I kind of mentioned a few bio facts. I'm, by training an electronics engineer and, software developer, and that's what I do during the day. My artwork is heavily influenced, like I'm looking at technology and history, things that I'm, passionate about, interested in. I kind of like to take technologies from different places and smoosh them together, like cross-stitching and circuit boards. For me, that's kind of interesting. But it also eliminates some connections between all these technologies, how one comes from another, how ideas from one translates to another one. I was, initially when I started making art, I was very opposed to using any sort of software development in my artwork. I'm not so opposed to that idea anymore. So recently I've started to explore ways in which we can use artificial intelligence to kind of become a studio assistant, to kind of become a source of inspiration. So yeah, that's kind of where I am. And that's where you can find me, kind of to borrow from Josh. If you look at my name and add a .net, that's what I am.
Great, thanks. And you have done a lot over the years, a lot of collaborative work, and been a leader in the Ames community and helping artists show their work or connect with each other. And
that's true. I mean, it's not really, well, I don't know how to define it. In a way, I don't consider it part of my arts practice, but more like me being an artist in the community. I was part of this organization, still is, called Ames Cart, and we organize lots of exhibitions locally, art in unexpected places. We even had an exhibition on the river. So the way to experience the exhibition was to float down the river. So, kind of ways to engage people and make it interesting. And
yeah, very cool. Thanks, Timmy. Jody.
Yeah, hello, me. So I am a studio artist and educator. I've been teaching in some capacity for the last 20 years. I've taught college for 20 years in a variety of roles. I'm the never-ending adjunct at UNO, University of Nebraska, Omaha. And then 10 years ago, I also started teaching in the K-12 classroom. So I've taught high school, and I'm on my 8th year of living in middle school. I like to say I'm never leaving adolescence. It's kind of inspiring and exhausting. And I do lots of different things. My work started mostly as photo-based work. A camera is usually involved in some way, but I paint, I sculpt. I did a lot of collaborative installations with my spouse for many years. I investigate ideas related to personal memory, historic memory, landscape, sense of place, domesticity, care, and how we take care of each other. What else am I supposed to talk about? My brain is getting tired.
Yeah, we're almost done. My brain's getting tired.
Okay.
Where can we find your work?
Oh, yes. So I have a website. It's just my name, jodieboyer.com. It's in desperate need of an update. I also am, 45 and on Instagram and having my 17-year-old teach me. It's super fun. So I'm just Iowa Jody Boyer with some underscores in there. And I'm on Facebook too. So, and I'm on this mission of posting art every day, Monday through Friday this year, as a way of making myself present to the work. Because when you teach as much as I do, sometimes you forget about your first love. And I'm trying to make my life about my first love, which is just making art, being an artist.
It's been fun to watch your posting every day.
Yes, thank you.
You're very dedicated.
I forgot my file this morning, first time since January 1st. And when I got home, I had 3 people that were like, 3 friends that were like, we were worried you were in trouble. We didn't have your, I get up at 5 and I swim every morning, Monday through Friday. And so I post right after I swim, kind of like exercise, post your art, So I'm trying to live what I try to teach 12-year-olds, because if I'm not doing it, a 12-year-old's going to call me out, right? So I'm trying to live it. And so I had to inform them, no, I am not dead. I am just tired.
That's so often the case, right? Well, thank you so much to all of you for being here today to talk about these ideas and help us educate people about what artists do and how important it is to support artists and get their work out in the world. And so I'd like to thank you for that. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today to listen. I want to say a special thank you to Jenie Gao for being such a thoughtful juror. And to our curator in residence, Jamie, for helping us do all the behind the scenes kinds of things that we needed to do tonight. Also, thank you to the Brown family and Hala Architecture for sponsoring. And Jen, do you have any final words that you want to say? Yeah, there you go.
No, it's just, this has been really an amazing conversation to be listening to. So thank you all for giving your time tonight and sharing your thoughts. And thank you so much to the Octagon and Jenie for this great partnership for the Business of Arts Conference that's coming tomorrow. And I'm really excited to hear more about being inspired as an artist. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much again to everyone, and I'll drop some information on the description of this video so that anyone who's looking at it a little bit later can see that information and find you. So with that, we'll say good night.